Let's look at 8 rules you can follow to create perfectly mobile responsive and mobile friendly websites, content, opt-in forms, you name it. Hello, I'm Shane Malach from thrivethemes.com, and in this video I'll be using the Thrive Architect plugin to demonstrate everything I talk about, but most of these principles apply no matter how you build your pages and content. So let's get started right away. Tip number 1 is to use images at their optimal size. What is an image's optimal size? It is basically the largest size that it will ever actually be shown at on your website. Here's what I mean by that. I'm loading an example page here, and we can see that there's one image that is taking forever to load. And even though it's a fairly small image, and there are larger images on the same page that didn't take nearly as long as that. Now, why is that? It's still loading, as you can see. If we click on this and I open this in a new tab, then we can see what's going on here. What's going on is that this image is huge. This here that we're looking at now is the original size of the image. And in fact, this image is about 6 megabytes in size, which is why it took forever to load. As you can imagine, so basically we've seen this happen where you download an original size image from somewhere, or you upload it straight from your camera. It's a huge image and you resize it on your website, but it will still load the full size. So what happened if we look at this in the editor is that basically I uploaded the image and I used the size slider here to change the size of the image. Now it's cool that we can do this, and it's fine to make small adjustments to the image size, but ideally if I'm going to display this image, as in this case at 300 pixels wide, then the perfect size for this is 300 pixels wide, because it's never going to be larger than this, right? This is 300 pixels on the widest screen. It might be smaller on smaller screens, but never going to be larger than this. So here's what you can do about this. If you go to your media library in WordPress, if you've uploaded this image, you can click on the image in the media library, and I'm not going to wait for it to load again here, but there's an edit image button. There it is. I click on edit image, and this gives me some very basic editing options, such as the dimensions. I can say 300, and I can click on scale, and it will do the resizing for me. And now I have this image in the correct size. So if I go back to the editor, let's remove this image and add it again so we can see what's going on. Here, if I look at the image in my media manager, you can see that now it is 300 by 200 pixels and there's only 32 kilobytes. So if I use this, I will show it at full size in my content, and it will load in a fraction of a second instead of in half a minute. I mentioned this first because we've seen this often, that the site has a lot of oversized images like that, and it just takes forever to load. And of course, if you're on a mobile phone, on a slow connection, those images will be tiny, but it will take forever to load them. And this is one of the worst things in terms of a visitor experience, someone coming to your site on a mobile device or even on a desktop device. It's very, very mobile unfriendly. Tip number 2, this is one of the most basic things you can do for mobile responsiveness. You can show or hide specific elements on different screen sizes. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Here we have a button on this page that says click this button. And maybe what I want to do is that on smaller mobile devices, I wanted to say tap this button. And the way to do that is I will just duplicate this button. I will change the text to tap in my duplicate. And then I will use responsive show and hide. So I'll go to my responsive settings. This one that says click, I want this to show on desktop devices, and I'll hide it on the other sizes. And then I'll do the opposite here. I want this button to show on tablet and mobile and to be hidden on desktop. So now if I switch to a smaller view, it says tap this button, and on the larger view, it says click this button. What I just showed you with the button text, this is one of the few examples where you have to duplicate the element and use show hide. A text change can only be done like that. But other style changes and even layout changes don't need a duplication of objects. That brings us to tip number 3. Use responsive editing and style changes for leaner code and a more elegant solution for mobile responsive pages. Here's an example of what I mean. We have a box here with an image, and the text is aligned to fit next to this image. And this works great, looks great on a wide screen. If I go onto a tablet screen, That doesn't look so great anymore because as soon as the text starts overlapping this image, it doesn't work anymore. Now, instead of duplicating this and making a tablet version of this box, I can actually change the styling and it will only apply to this screen size and smaller screens. So in this case, I can go to my paragraph text here and I can restrict the width to something that fits here. So let's say 440 pixels. That seems about right. And I'll do the same here, 440. And then maybe I also want to change, this is another change we can easily do. I can make it a bit smaller so it takes up less space. I can also go like this. So I can change the spacing, I can change the size, I can change the position. And these are all style changes in Thrive Architect. All the changes that you do in the sidebar will be specific to this device size. So here, if I go back to desktop, we can see the text is nicely aligned next to the image. In tablet mode, it's still nicely aligned, even though it's moved around a little bit. And then on the phone, probably won't work anymore. So here, we could try and move the text around. Now we could move it down, for example. But another thing we can do, and I just want to show you some more examples of what you can do here in mobile editing, is I can change the way I can change the background style, because the background of this box is also a style we change in the sidebar. So we can do that mobile specific. For example, I could add an overlay here like this. So we can still see the image in the background, but the text is more readable. That's a possible change. I could also remove the image and just have a solid color, or I can maybe use a different image that shows on mobile. So anything you do here in the sidebar will be device specific. So there we go. That is a cool looking content box with an image that will now look good on any screen size. The rule to understand here is that basically inline changes will apply to all screen sizes, and style changes can be made size or device specific. That means if I want, let's say, this text to be somewhere else, if I drag and drop this text, then it will be in this new position on all screen sizes. But if I change the font size or the font color or anything else about the style, then that can be applied to only specific screen sizes. That can be done responsively. And like I said before, a text change, if I want this to say something else, then that will apply to all screen sizes. But anything I do in the sidebar, all the style changes are device specific. Before we go further into tips, here's a general principle that I think is good to remember. There's a principle called Occam's razor, which is roughly the hypothesis making the fewest assumptions is probably true. Sometimes also maybe translated as the simplest explanation is most likely to be true. There is a version of this that applies very much to mobile responsive web design, which is that the solution with the fewest steps to the desired layout is probably the best one. So if I have to do fewer changes and fewer steps to get the layout I want, that's probably better than even if I have a similar solution that just requires more steps, more editing, and so on. We'll see several examples of this. Following these principles, this is the principle I keep in mind because this leads to the leanest code, the least code on the page, right? The least modifications needed. And it's also much more friendly. It's also much more human friendly. So if you follow this principle, it's easier for someone else to take over the page and make edits and understand what's going on. It's also easier for future you to remember what you did and why you did it and make changes. This brings us to tip number 4. Use alignments and max width settings before using margins and padding. Let me show you this using the text here. So first of all, of course, if I have a line of text here, let's say I want this to be center aligned, it wouldn't be a good idea to add side padding here of whatever it would be until it looks more or less center aligned. Because first of all, well, on smaller screens, it will just keep being pushed over and it won't be center aligned anymore. It doesn't look very nice. So we don't want to do that. And of course, we just use the alignment options on text. Another example is I have the headline text running like this. And I want it to run like this. I want the first break to be after the ampersand and then the headline to be at the bottom like this. And the way I did it is I added line breaks. But as you can see on smaller screens, this doesn't look good anymore. So now we have this ampersand all alone here, which isn't good. So what's a better way to do that? Well, I definitely have to remove these line breaks, right? I have to have this running normally, this text. Now, again, I might think that, okay, I can add some padding on the side like this to get the desired effect, right? So I basically add space here on the side, but this again causes problems because this space stays fixed and it doesn't look good anymore on smaller screens. And I can go and correct that on smaller screens, but again, that's more steps, right? That's additional steps where I have different margins and they change, or different padding changes on different screen sizes. We really don't want that. So there is a better way to do that, which is to restrict the width or to use max width. So if I go here, we remove this and I take the element, the entire element, and I give it a max width. Let's say 820 seems to do it. This is the max width. So it basically says you can go this wide, but no wider, but you can go less wide. So that means that as soon as the screen comes in to a smaller size, there's no more extra space over here cramping it further together. It is allowed to run as wide as it can. Now, in this case, it still doesn't look great, but this would be a case for resizing the text size because, of course, it looks great on a larger screen at a large size. Then on a smaller screen, we probably want to reduce the screen size a bit. You can also use this for different alignments. So if you want to bump text out of the way of an image, you can also use the max width and alignment to do that. So that's an important option to keep in mind. There are many cases in which using max width and alignment is a better choice than adding lots of paddings and stuff. Another example is here we have a column layout, and maybe I want this image to be aligned with these menu items. And I might think, okay, I'm going to start adding top and side margins and padding and stuff to bump them into line. But the first thing we should look at is in the columns, I can vertically center stuff. So with just one change, I can fix this alignment, make it look good instead of, fiddling around with various settings. Then one final example is, let's say we have some text here and I don't want the text to run this wide. Problem is if I add side padding, actually let's add a lot to really make it clear. Right? I can make this narrower like this, but on a phone view, it gets scrunched up really badly like this. And here again, the solution to this is to use max width. So I can get the same effect if I have no side padding. I center align it, and here I can restrict the width. And it will still look good on a tablet. Now it goes full width. And on a mobile, it will still look good. That is the solution to use. Tip number 5 is to use column layouts instead of wrapping text around images. This goes for any kind of largish to medium image. What I can do is I can take this image, I can, let's say, right align it, and in the advanced options, I can make it float. That means text will go next to it. So now the text wraps around the image. The problem with this is that on a medium screen, this will still look fine, and we have this text wrapping effect. But on a small screen, this happens, and the text gets all scrunched up. Because here it basically says, as long as you can fit a letter in next to this image, that's what you do. That's simply how text wrapping or floating works. So that's not something we can really fix in our editor, but here's what you can do. In most cases, if you have something like this, I'm going to undo this, center align it again. I'll just drop it next to the text right here. Now I have a column layout and I can adjust it like this. And now I have a very similar effect. On a tablet, let's see, it still looks good. I could also adjust this if I want the image and the proportions to be slightly different. And on a mobile, what will happen is that they will stack on top of each other. So now the text still has all the room it needs. The image is still there, but we never have this weird scrunched up text effect. Wrapping text is really best reserved for small things. So if you have a small icon, you want text to wrap around that, and even on the smallest screen size, that will still look fine. That is what this wrap or float option is good for. For everything else, I recommend using column layouts. Tip number 6, use the 20 pixel, 10 pixel rule of thumb for side padding. I will get rid of this image here again, because this text block is what we want to work with. Now, so far I've talked about how adding too much padding, especially on the sides, can often cause problems. But padding and margin do have a purpose. And one of them, and it generally happens in small amounts, okay? Small amounts of padding are very important. So what we have here as an example is that the text starts sticking really close to the edges of the screen. It doesn't look very nice anymore. And this becomes especially apparent if we change the alignment. So here you can really see that it's just stuck to the side of the screen here, and the same on mobile. It's not a very nice look. So this is something that padding is very good for. So what we can do here is on this background section, on the section that this is inside of, I will add 20 pixel side padding on each side. And on the large view, that makes no difference. But if I zoom in, or if I go to a smaller view, now we can see that there's a nice little bit of space around the text. So it gives it just a little room to breathe, makes it look nice. However, on a smaller view, it takes a bit much of the space away. We don't have that much space to spare here, and 20 pixels is already a bit much. So a good idea is to reduce it to 10 pixels on the smallest screen sizes. That just gives it a bit more space, lets it add in 1 or 2 more words on some lines, and wastes a bit less of the precious space. On the larger sizes, it will still be those 20 pixels. So that's simply, when in doubt, add 20 pixels side padding on large and medium screens and 10 pixels side padding on the smallest screens. Tip number 7, work from the outside in. This is another one of those Occam's razor type tips. So if we have something like a content box here, to get the spacing working here, I could start from the inside and I can go, okay, I'm going to add, some top margin, some bottom margin, some side margin, and then on the next element I add different side margins and so on to get this look. But what I do instead is I work from the outside in. I go to the outside element, and the first thing I do is I add padding. So here's what this looks like if we don't have padding. Everything's scrunched together, and I would have to apply different padding or margins or something to each element to get this look. But with one move, which is simply adding 30 pixel padding all around, I can get everything to look better. And in general, the outside in approach is what we use. So for example, another example of this is instead of adding some text and then styling this text, adding the next bit of text, styling that, and so on, what I do first is I go to landing page settings and I set the styles I want. I set, what do I want an H1 heading to look like by default? What do I want an H2 heading to look like by default, and so on. And I do that first so that then I just add my elements and I don't have to style each individual one. So this is what I generally recommend. Always start at the outermost containing element. So your background section, your box around the thing, your column, and so on, and make changes there, and then make changes to the small things inside and the individual elements last. Tip number 8, generally work from the desktop to the phone view with one exception. So in general, the way I recommend you work is that you create your content, you create your landing page on the large view, then you go to the tablet view where sometimes you want to make some minor corrections for things to look better. And then you want to go to the phone view, and here you often have to make more changes, such as here's one, right? Font size change and some spacing changes and stuff like that to make sure everything still looks good. So you go from large to medium to small. There's one important exception. If we go back to a large view, we looked at it here. If this here is a content box style that I want to use again, so maybe I have several versions of this, each one with different text and a different image, before I duplicate it, I make sure it looks good on all screen sizes. Because otherwise I have to go and make the adjustments. So we already looked at them, right? We already made the adjustments necessary for this to look good on all screen sizes. And now, as you can see, all of those adjustments also apply to the duplicates. So basically before you hit that duplicate icon, always ask yourself, hold on, is this mobile responsive? Check that element and make adjustments for all screen sizes and then duplicate it. The same is true for saving content templates. Make them mobile responsive first, then save them as templates. All right, those are the 8 tips. Here's a quick recap. Number 1, upload images at their optimal size, which is the largest size they will be shown at. Number 2, use the show hide feature, but only for inline changes such as text changes. Number 3, use responsive editing for everything else. Number 4, use alignments and max width settings before adding side paddings and margin and stuff like that. Number 5, use column layouts in favor over text wrapping except for very small things. Number 6, use the 20-10 pixel padding rule. Number 7, work from the outside in. And number 8, work from desktop to phone except before duplicating something. Following these rules makes sure that all of your content looks amazing no matter the device size. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you have any other questions on this topic, please let us know by leaving a comment below.